Assalamu alaikum. So welcome back to another edition of FitSys, the podcast, all about the Muslima in the arena. Each week, we highlight and profile female Muslim athletes and talk a little bit about their challenges and their experiences with the aim of inspiring and motivating you to move more, inshallah. This week, I chat to Zainab Awan. She is a Canadian, Pakistani, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu athlete. She's a purple belt. She lives in Canada and runs a gym with her husband. And she's also a carnivore. So we have a lot in common. I'd like to thank the following sponsors. Cafe Camino is a halal eatery in Pretoria with a very high-end feel that prides itself on creating beautiful fast food that doesn't compromise on quality. LA Farms is a Cape Town-based farm-to-fork concept that values grass-fed, sustainable farming of cows and sheep and has an amazing eatery and butchery in Greenpoint and a butchery in Wynberg. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Walaikum salam. Thanks for having me.
So Zainab, we've been following each other for a while, and the more I follow you, subhanAllah, the more I feel like we have quite a lot in common. The carnival thing was a recent thing. I was like, snap, we both do that too. So there's a lot, inshallah, that I want to talk about. But let's bring the listeners into the mix. So just starting off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Zainab. I'm a mom of two. I live in Calgary, Canada. I was born and raised here in Canada my whole life. I lived here, and I don't think there's much else about. Usually when I introduce myself, those are like the main things. But aside from that, my husband and I, we own two Brazilian Jiu Jitsu academies that we started back in like 2010. So I'm sure we'll get into that. And I started training Jiu Jitsu after my son was born. So I had a very traumatic birthing experience with him. My husband suggested that I take up Jiu Jitsu, which was like his dream to have his family do Jiu Jitsu. And so I started training, and ever since then, it's just been a wild ride, just balancing our academy, kids, family, turned it into a business. And I don't want to say that my entire personality has been jiu-jitsu, but it's become a big part of my life. So, yeah, that in a nutshell, that's who I am. Cole's notes.
So we've got Snap on both having two kids, Snap on both starting jiu-jitsu after having kids, Snap on both owning jiu-jitsu academies with our husbands getting us into jiu-jitsu. I'm just saying there's something here. So I take it your husband was doing jiu-jitsu when you guys met or before you started?
Yeah, so he actually has been doing martial arts his entire life. So martial arts was a huge part of his life. He started when he was like 7. Like his dad got him into wrestling, and then it just kind of took off from there. And so when I met him, he was actually teaching jiu-jitsu in our local, I think it was in our mosque, and my brother was in his class. And so I always heard his name being mentioned, but I didn't really know who he was. And then when we met, he just like wouldn't stop talking about martial arts. And so I had taken Taekwondo as a kid, which most people do, right? They start with like Taekwondo or karate. And I had done that when I was like 11. And then after we got married, it was just, he just continued. Like he had told me like, listen, martial arts is a huge part of my life. And I knew that, he was going to continue with that, and his dream was to open his own school one day. He's an engineer professionally, but he's always wanted to teach. He always loved teaching and sharing that knowledge. So long story short, after our daughter was born, we moved to Calgary, and then he was still training. No, he wasn't training jiu-jitsu at the time because we lived in like a really remote area. After we got married, we moved to a place called Drumheller. He was out there working in the field, and then when we moved to Calgary, he took up jiu-jitsu and martial arts again. Yeah, so he was asked to start teaching in a community center that was attached to our local mosque, and so he started teaching there, and that was more geared towards like the Muslim community, but we didn't get a great response from the Muslim community. It was a whole bunch of non-Muslims that were coming, which was fine, like we will train with anyone. And then I was pregnant with our son, and then after my son was born, when I was pregnant with my son, my daughter, she was 3 years old at the time, and she was in the kids classes. So we had a few kids classes, we had an adults class, and she would always be the kid like running around, and then he would like try to get her to sit down and pay attention and learn jiu-jitsu. And I started picking up the lingo. I started learning about the guard, and I started learning about Americana and sweeps and stuff. And then I would, start coaching her and tell her, okay, now do this and do that. And then I was like, this looks really fun. Like, I kind of want to try it out myself. Which was really surprising to my husband because he was like, you swore off jujitsu, because I was like, this is, at first looking at it, it's not a very attractive martial art, right? It's like people sweating and sitting on each other. And I was like, I will never do something like this. My husband tried teaching me years before that, and he would get into mount and he would pin my arms down and say, okay, now try to get out. And I was like, get off of me. Like, this is gross. Like, I don't enjoy this. This is like, people do this for fun. This is so weird. And I was like, I will never ever do jiu-jitsu. This is not for me. But then when my daughter started doing it, I was like, I kind of want to do this. Like, if she can do it, I can do it. It can't be that hard. And then my son was born. He was born in the ambulance. So that was traumatic on its own. That took me a while to kind of get past. Of course, when you're going through PTSD, it's not something that you can just even with jujitsu, it wasn't something I could just forget about, but it was a way for me to kind of distract myself from the thoughts that were replaying in my head. And then I started, and there was a few ladies in our class that weren't obviously comfortable working with men because it's close contact in nature. So my husband told him, well, why don't I have mats in my basement? He was actually also teaching at his work. So at his work, they had a multi-purpose room, and they were trying to get people to be more active throughout the day because they're sitting at their desks in front of a computer. So at lunch hour, he would teach jujitsu, and some people would teach yoga and dance and whatever. So he brought mats, and there were some ladies in the building that also worked for the same company, and they wanted to learn. And he's like, well, my wife wants to learn too, and she wants to train with women. I have mats in my basement. Would you guys feel comfortable if you came over and, you can have a private class? So they came over and we started having classes in our basement. And then it just kind of took off from there. He ended up getting laid off. We ended up doing jiu-jitsu full time. We're like, okay, we're going to make this our full-time thing. The mosque wanted to start running their own program, so they asked us to leave, which was, a blessing in disguise. We found a place and we signed the lease, and we were like, oh my gosh, what are we getting ourselves into? We just signed our life away basically for the next 5 years. And then it became real. Then it became okay, this is a business. We have to do it right. There's people giving us their credit card, and we're, we have to be responsible, and we have to run this like a business. So then just mixing business and jiu-jitsu, that was really challenging for me. But I've always enjoyed it. When I'm on the mats, I always enjoy it. It's always a place where you can just focus on yourself, and you don't need to really think about, dinner, and you don't need to think about this, you don't need to think about the kids. You can just really just focus on yourself. You're so focused on getting out from bad positions and figuring, just piecing techniques together and figuring out problems. But yes, to answer your question, my husband got me into it, and I guess my daughter also kind of inspired me, because I was little 3-year-old is doing it. It can't be that hard. And it just kind of took off from that point.
That's an amazing story, and I love what you say around some of the kind of the concerns or the initial things on your back in terms of trying jiu-jitsu out, around it feeling uncomfortable in an uncomfortable position, or it being quite gross and sweaty and close contact, because those are all the, to feel that yourself, you can connect so much more with other women who feel all those things before they start, because so many women come into a gym environment that is, predominantly male dominated, and they're like, oh my goodness, could never do that. I could never be under the sweaty guy, or I wouldn't want to be, around that, or whatever the case is. So I know I deal with that a lot in my academy now. So I think coming from a place of being a beginner, being intimidated, being a little bit, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for, but feeling a little bit hesitant around the close contact is such a good place to understand, because I think a lot of men, they don't necessarily know what those challenges feel like, and so as a result they can't connect, especially with women who feel those things. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I don't think that's why most gyms are filled with men, right? Because it's something that they find very natural. It's natural for them to get physical, with someone, and it's something that they're kind of programmed to do. Boys have to be physical in nature. It's just something that allows them to release and allows them to kind of calm themselves down. With women, it's different. The way that we exert energy is through talking and bonding, and it's different. So going into a space where now you have to be physical, it's not something that we're used to, definitely not something, we're not, and like the positions that we're in jiu-jitsu is not something that we would normally find ourselves in. And that's usually what I tell people. I know it's weird. I know this is unconventional. Yes, you have to sit on top of someone. When we're doing north-south, yes, your crotch is going to be in someone's face. Like it is very different. And yeah, only a woman can really understand what that feeling feels like. For men, it's just like, oh, you just do it and you get over it. But for women, it's like it takes a long time to get used to having somebody that close to you. And especially for some women that have gone through trauma in their life, getting close to somebody can trigger a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions. It can take you back into places that you don't want to be in. So yeah, definitely I would say that. And I think that's why having spaces for women and having female instructors is so important. And they're really hard to find.
And I think the fact that it's like you kind of went into this so relatively early on, in terms of you started the academy with your husband, and pretty much straight away you were there as, as a female coach and as a female option, which is such a beautiful thing. It took us, my husband started the business first and I joined maybe 10 years later. And I've now been in that space for the last 7 years, but I needed to first kind of get to like a late blue belt stage before I thought that this was something that I really wanted to take seriously. And when I got started, there weren't any other women around. So then there was my husband. So I was like, he's 40, 50 kilograms heavier than me. If that one other lady doesn't come to class, then I don't get to train. Yeah. So I remember there were very many evenings where I had like a toddler and a baby, and I would get babysitting so I could go train, only to get to the gym and have nobody to train with. Do you have any like that you can relate to?
That was my whole first 5 years of my jiu-jitsu journey, was just the balancing act. And it was like, so we were at that time, I don't know what's going on with my voice, I apologize. At that time, after my son was born, I took some time before I started jiu-jitsu. It wasn't like he was born and then I was on the mats. It was like he was 4 months old when I started. And so I was still nursing him, still doing all of that. The nice thing for me was that we started classes in our basement for me. And so it was easy for me to just put him up inside the crib, turn on the baby monitor, run downstairs to the basement. So that was a little bit easier. But when we moved out of our basement and we started classes, more women's classes in the community center, yeah, it definitely got challenging, especially as my son got older. He was very clingy. He was very I don't know, he was a very difficult toddler, let's just say. He didn't like people coming close to me. He didn't like people coming close to him. He was very afraid of people. And so that was really tough, just having to deal with that and peeling him off of me so I could focus on my partner. And then the guilt that you feel as well. It's just the guilt just never leaves you. It's just okay, well, I should be with my child, but it's really just 1 hour of my day 3 times a week that I'm here. He's going to be fine if I just sit him in the corner. So yeah, that was really tough, taking breaks to change his diaper or to nurse him. It was every day, all the time. So I always had to prepare. It wasn't just for most people, you go to class and you come back. For me, it was okay, I got to get the kids fed, got to get snacks, got to get extra clothes, got to check the baby, the diaper bag, got to get, I also used to take our pack and play, our play yard, and I used to haul that with me so I can sit there. It was a whole production that I always deal with. Yeah, and I think it would always affect my training too, because I would always kind of look over and just make sure he's okay while I'm sweeping someone. And it's tough. It is tough. And I really, I can sympathize with women that have to continue doing that balancing act for everything, just finding that little window of their day to do some fitness. I know it is tough, but I survived, and now we're in a much better place. My son is 12 years old now, so we're in a different phase of life.
And it goes, subhanAllah, it goes so quick. It's when you're mentioning these things, it feels to me like it was just yesterday, but I've got a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old, mashallah, and it's now it's great. Now they're cool and they come to class with you. And when I don't have a partner on the mat, there's a kid that's kind of my size that I can work with, which is great. So alhamdulillah, these things work out. So there's kind of 2 things that you mentioned, and I feel like they're entwined for other women, because it's often the reason why women don't start, right? You mentioned the guilt and how that can be so consuming. And then you mentioned the amount of work that has to go into making a training session happen, whether it's jiu-jitsu or going to the gym or whatever it is that as a woman, as a mom, you're doing for yourself. And so as a result, I think a lot of women just don't get started with any kind of sport. And something that I've seen in the Muslim community specifically is I feel like women, especially men as well, but women especially, like we're not taking our health and our fitness seriously. And the excuses that I get from a coaching perspective is just time, guilt, the amount of work that goes into it. What do you see on your side? Is this something that you're kind of navigating with your clients as well?
Yeah, I think specifically to the I think all women actually have the same, when we really think about where we all face the same challenges when it comes to motherhood. So it's not something more unique to Muslim women, but just talking about Muslim women for a sec here. Yeah, I think definitely, there's also so many different cultures, right? So culturally, you have like the Arab culture, you have like the Pakistani culture, you have, so many different cultures that have different expectations put on women. And so when you mix that in, it becomes even more challenging because women from those cultures take motherhood very, very seriously. And so they put a lot of expectation on themselves. There's an expectation towards your in-laws, maybe on how you're raising your children. And then there's like the societal expectations. And then if you're living in a place like North America, there's like a whole other branch of culture that, there's other expectations put on you on how children should be raised. And so, yeah, I think women we just have a lot going on up here that when it comes time to take care of ourselves, we get the leftovers, right? It's like whatever's left over in the family budget, okay, maybe then I can go and take care of myself. Or if there's extra time at the end of the night, okay, maybe I can go and get my workout in. But yeah, I think it's not prioritized, and I think now it's time that we change that narrative and we start prioritizing our health, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't show up for other people. Just that is motherhood. We have to show up for people. It's not something that is ever going to change. We have to show up for our families. It's a huge blessing. It's a huge undertaking, and that's why Allah tells us, the Prophet told us that heaven lies under the feet of your mother. It is a huge undertaking. But yeah, I do feel that Muslim women in particular, we don't prioritize our health. And just speaking culturally, I'm from a Pakistani background. And I remember, I was thinking about this the other night. I remember when I was 17, I went to Pakistan, and I remember meeting my entire family, like our whole extended family, for the first time. And everyone was overweight. Everyone had health issues. Everybody had arthritis. Everyone had diabetes. Everyone had back issues, joint issues, you name it. And I was like, is this what my future is going to look like? Am I going to be overweight? Am I going to have all these health issues? And that's why now, as I get closer and closer to 40, I'm just like, I don't want to be that. I don't want that to be my future. Like, no way am I going to I have no excuse. My kids are older. I have access to a gym. I really have no excuse. And I remember when my daughter was a baby, I used to do push-ups in the kitchen. Okay, like I used to get down on the floor in between feeding her and cooking. I used to get down and do push-ups in the kitchen, on my kitchen floor, because I knew I didn't have time to go down to the basement to get a workout in. Even though I had a basement full of workout equipment, I just knew it wasn't going to happen. My daughter never slept. So, it is what it is. And so I think we just need to stop. Yes, we have all these responsibilities, but there really is no excuse to get a workout in. Like, you don't need fancy equipment. You don't need a gym membership. You just need YouTube and you need floor space, and that's it. That's literally all that you need. So not even talking about jiu-jitsu here and going to, and do a martial art. It's just taking care of your health in the smallest of ways. Let's say you have 3-4 kids. Get them, make it an activity before bed. Okay, guys, we're going to do our squats, and now we're going to do our push-ups, and now we're going to do this. Now we're going to run in our spot. There's so many different ways that you can do it. You just have to want to do it. So I think that we are a generation full of excuses, and we just need, if something was so important to us, we would find a way. And also, being Muslim, we are taught to be disciplined from a very young age. When it comes to our prayers, when it comes to Ramadan is tough. In some parts of the world, depending on the time of year, we're fasting for 17 hours, right? But we know that we can do it. What was it? Your mind gives up before your body. We know we can do it. right? We know that we can do it. We know that it's tough, but we do it anyways because we think of the end in mind. And that's kind of been my mantra for this year is think of the end in mind. The end is your goal. And yes, it's going to be tough. There's going to be battles. There's going to be uphill, downhill. It's never going to be linear. And so we are already disciplined. So when I hear people say, oh, I'm not disciplined enough to do that.
Yeah, it's nonsense.
Yes. Like BS. It is complete nonsense.
Yeah.
We are disciplined as Muslims to get through an entire month of fasting and not even water, which is tough. You know, praying 5 times a day. Yes, okay, we slip up, but then we get back on our train. So I don't like hearing from people that, oh, I'm just not disciplined. Yes, we are. It's in our fitrah to be disciplined. We are disciplined beings. We just make excuses and we allow those excuses to control us. So sorry about that rant. I just get so fired up when I love it. I love it. It's what I hear. That's what I'm here for. And I love that you say that you went to Pakistan and you saw your extended family and how unhealthy or overweight they were. Because I think, sometimes a lot of so I do health coaching for clients as well besides jiu-jitsu coaching. A lot of them will say like genetically, this is in my family. And you and I will both know coming from that carnivore space that there's a big push now in that primal health space that you can change your genetics. You might have a genetic predisposition because you have a family history of X, Y, and Z, but you can change that through eating correctly and through moving. The problem is that we're as a culture, as a community, globally, we're not doing either of those things right. I think there's a focus on discipline from a Ramadan perspective, from a prayer perspective, all those things. But when it comes to food, it's like we choose to overlook the sunnah around eating completely. And it's halal, right? There's no alcohol, there's no pork, so I can just indulge in all the cake and all the sugar. But our ancestors, like all of this food that is culturally part of everyone's table, whether you're Indian, Pakistani, Arab, whatever you are, if that food existed 200 years ago, it looked very different to what it looks like now. If it even existed, I don't know. I don't know what what your Pakistani ancestors were eating 300-400 years ago. I'm pretty sure it wasn't what a lot of your family members are eating now. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, no, 1,000%. And I think it's just, now like we have so many resources too. So it's like, it's not like someone can say like, I don't know. Yes, you do know. Like we're choosing not to know. We're choosing not to allow ourselves to change. So yeah, we have to start taking responsibility and not blaming genetics all the time. And it was a few months ago, I was scrolling TikTok and there was this creator that was saying that people from the subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent, so he's talking about Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Sri Lankans, all of us, we have joint and arthritis and blood sugar issues because of colonization. And I was like, what? Wait a second. What is... That's weird. And so I listened to the end of his video and he was basically saying that because of colonization, this led us to, to famine and not eating healthy, blah, blah, blah. And that just carried over. And I was just like, we really need to stop blaming colonization for everything. Like colonization happened years ago, not even in our lifetime. And we are choosing to go and buy the chocolate bar and sit and binge all night long. That wasn't because of colonization. That's because we're deciding to do that.
And so it's addictive.
Like we have to stop blaming other people and playing the blame game and playing victim all the time. We have the time, we have the resources. It all comes down to time management. And so I get so fired up when I think about these things that we really have no excuse. And if it's important to you, you'll find a way.
Yeah, I think one of the sayings that stuck with me the most around this is, and it's mental health and physical health, is you may not have come from a healthy family, but make sure a healthy family comes from you. It's something that I send off to my female clients all the time because they often underestimate, moms are going to put the kids first before everything else. That's just what we do. So it's like my manipulation tactic is like, okay, fine, you aren't putting yourself forward enough to be, you're not important enough to be healthy, but what about the rest of your family that you're feeding bad food, or you're not, making exercise part of the entire family's protocol. So that's kind of how I try to navigate. But it sounds like as a family, you guys are quite naturally active, maybe kind of stemming from your husband's leadership initially. As a Pakistani woman, did you find any pushback in your community being a female in jiu-jitsu?
No, not really. I don't really. So my family lives in Winnipeg, and I grew up in Winnipeg, and then I moved to Calgary. And so when we moved to Calgary, I wasn't really part of like the greater community. And I guess the way that I grew up, I did grow up in a very strict household. And my parents, they obviously they did the best they can with whatever little they knew. They came here as immigrants, and so I think health was never, it was like my mom always would talk about health and like this is healthy and that's healthy and whatever, but physical activity was never something that was a priority, especially for girls. It was like if we took part in a sport, it was only because the mosque was offering it and it was girls only, and that's why that was like my exposure to sports. And then gym class, I was, we always tried, my sisters and I, to join the girls teams at schools, whether it's a basketball team or whatever. It always had to be centered around like girls only. And I think I don't think I had any pushback. I think there was always a shock factor that you're doing jujitsu, like okay, that's different. But there was never any pushback per se. And I think I just also surround myself with people that are positive and not people that are negative. And of course, there's family members that might think it's weird. I just choose not to talk to them and like
Take
interact with them. Yeah, you have to set those boundaries and you have to surround yourself with people that are going to be supportive. My sisters and like my siblings, my brother were like our support network, and they've always been really supportive. My parents have just been like a little shocked, like, okay, this is weird, but it's never been like a negative thing. So my experience has been pretty positive. The Muslim community is a whole other story, because I think I don't know if you want to get into this now, but I feel the Muslim community itself, like, I think they expect a lot of special classes, special services, because, we're the Muslim community and we need something that's just for us and we need something that's just for our girls. But then when it's offered to them, they don't take it up.
Come.
Like, it's just,
Yeah.
they don't come. And that's really frustrating. And so I spent years trying to even like when we started our jujitsu classes, my husband was teaching. It was in the community center right next to the masjid. Like, it was called the youth center, and it was connected. It was under the same organization, and people didn't show up. Like, it was mainly non-Muslims that would show up. They would find us on Google and they would show up to classes. There was maybe like one or two Muslims. They were really bad with commitment. They didn't want to pay up, and I don't know, they just kind of took the space for granted. And even now, a lot of people will ask, like, oh, what about like women's only classes for Muslim women? And I'm like, listen, I spent years doing that. None of you guys showed up. You guys asked for it. I've always put it out there. I've always done women's only self-defense, women's only this for the Muslim community, and people just don't show up. And so why do we need to have everything specialized for our community? Why do we need that?
So that's fascinating for me, because I've had similar experiences here, and I mean, we're speaking to different communities completely. What do you think that's about? Why do you think that is?
I think there's so many layers to this, because it's not just one thing. I think one is, I don't think physical activity was something that was prioritized when they were younger. Especially for me, like, physical activity wasn't prioritized. It was something that my sister and I started taking seriously as we got older. We went and got ourselves a gym membership. We would get up early in the morning and we would go together, and that was something that we prioritized. And I think just, I don't know, at some point we have to stop blaming culture for everything, but I really do think it comes from culture, that health and fitness is just not, we don't see our parents doing it. We don't see my parents who are, baby boomers, like, we never saw them do stuff like that. And so I guess that it definitely has an effect on children, and we see that with our own children, right? They will mimic whatever mom and dad are doing. They will have the same, like, they are sponges. They just kind of absorb everything that mom and dad are doing. And so when you don't see that when you're growing up, when you become an adult, it's just kind of hard to get into. And also, I think that when a lot of, especially for the Muslim community, I think that when we become parents and when we're like, we enter the marriage phase and beyond, it's just a lot of things that we did as a kid. Even like, let's say you played soccer your whole life and you were on the soccer team. Well, now I'm an adult, and so I don't do that stuff anymore. Now that's for my children. It's just, we don't see that adults can continue on and be physically active. Like, how many adults do you know that are still playing? Here, hockey is huge. So I have met a few adult men in their 40s that will still go and play hockey because they played hockey as a kid. You'll never see that in the Muslim community, unless it's cricket, because there are like, uncles that will get together and play cricket, which is great, but you don't see them kind of going outside of that. Especially for women, they just don't. It's just, well, now I'm a mom, now I got to focus on my family. That's it. I don't think they think that you can continue with that as an adult.
It's so interesting because I think there's two things there. The one is that whether it's culturally, different cultures from a Muslim perspective generally don't value women, especially being active. And so you don't have a foundation as a kid, like you said, that you've grown up with a sport that you can fall back on at some stage. And so as a young adult, either you're getting into the gym yourself, or 3 kids later, you realize I want to lose some weight. And so now you're only going into the fitness space for the first time for the purposes of losing weight because of having babies. And then I feel like exercise becomes a chore because it's for this purpose of losing weight. And for me, even though I didn't come from I wasn't born Muslim, I wasn't raised in a traditional Muslim culture, so to speak, didn't have a foundation in exercise. And so my first touch point with real exercise was when I wanted to lose weight after having 2 babies. And I tried the regular gym, running on the treadmill, and I hated it. I would just look at my watch the whole time and it'd be like, oh, I need 200 calories. I need to burn more. And then suddenly jiu-jitsu happened, and I just, I got so engrossed in learning this skill that I wasn't paying attention to the weight loss journey. And then 4 months later, you're like, oh, damn, I'm looking good. I'm feeling strong. And it's a byproduct. But what I really got out of it was learning a new skill. And that's why sport, I feel like, is such a powerful tool, because you're constantly learning whatever the sport is. But obviously both of us are biased with jiu-jitsu. It's a distraction, right? So you're not focusing on the weight loss. And I think for women, especially when you focus so hard on the weight loss, it can feel like such an impossible task that you probably end up self-sabotaging before you even get started. But when you get to distract yourself with something else, the weight loss becomes a byproduct.
Definitely. I always tell people that too, that it's a side effect to doing this. Like, you are going to lose the weight and you are going to learn this, but you're really going to learn a lot more about yourself. So I think we just have to, for women especially, like, just time management, prioritize, and think of the end in mind. What are you going to gain out of this for yourself? And putting yourself first is not bad. In what world do we live in that we think that putting ourselves first is a bad thing? You're happier. Your mental health is a lot better. You can show up for your kids and they will see that as well. So there's just so many benefits.
So I think this is a good point to just pivot briefly into the carnivore space, because I'm super interested while we're speaking about health and fitness. How long have you been carnivore for, and kind of what sparked the move?
So I started carnivore in 2019, so I'm fairly new to it. So there was a guy at our gym who was always talking to my husband about keto and like the things that he was trying, and he's like, yeah, my wife and I are going to try carnivore. And we were like, oh, what's that? And then he sent us all these resources about carnivore, and they were going to try it for a couple weeks, and we're like, oh, that looks interesting. And then my husband's like, yeah, why don't you do it with me? Like, let's do it together. And I'm like, okay. So we started it, and my gut health just completely transformed when I started carnivore. I had no idea what the benefits of it were. Like, I just kind of walked into it a little bit blind. But when I started feeling so much better, when I was a kid, I had a stomach ache every single day of my life. I kid you not. There was always something wrong with my stomach. And it was, I'm eating Pakistani food every day. There's heavy seed oils, there's a lot of spice. You're having roti, biryani, things like that every day. You're having the rice, everything. And so it just, wrecked my gut health. And so when I went strictly on carnivore for 2 months, this was back in 2019, I started realizing what the problem foods were. And so it just a light bulb just went off, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is bad for me, this is bad for me. And I just started, it was process of elimination, right? You just started realizing what foods are really bad for your health. And then I was like, I'm just going to continue with this. So we continued on, and we also incorporated intermittent fasting and OMAD. So just eating 1 meal a day. That was so much better for me. My insulin went down, my inflammation went down. Going to the bathroom was a lot less stressful. My skin got better. There was just so many benefits. My energy levels were a lot better. I didn't feel sluggish. I wasn't bloated. I just felt better. I felt healthier. And my jujitsu also got better because I could invert now. It was just, like there were so many things that I wasn't able to do before in jujitsu, inversions, and I still don't know how to berimbolo properly, but I will get there one day. But
Girl,
it just
me too.
became easy. And my husband too, like he would always say like I couldn't really invert before, and now that's all he does. So yeah, there was just so many benefits to it, and I've always been like, obviously when you're out with family or something, you kind of have to, when I go home to visit my parents, I want to eat my mom's cooking, but then the next day I feel it
Yeah.
immediately. I
Yeah.
feel it. And so, yeah, carnivore has just been like a game changer to our health. And right now, my kids are doing it. So, my daughter is 16, my son is 12. They have tournaments coming up. My daughter wants to be in a certain weight class. I'm like, okay, we're doing this solely for the purpose of jujitsu and it's not for like aesthetic reasons at all. So I'm allowing her to experiment with it, and it's going really well so far for the two of them. Yeah, there's just so many benefits. Like I think everyone should try it for at least a month to 2 months, and you'll start
Yeah.
to realize what is wrong with your body. Like a doctor will not tell you that. And even my doctor, she pulled my blood work during that time. And she showed me the chart and she's like, man, what were you doing around this time? Because like your numbers are so good. I'm like, I was doing the carnivore diet. Like I was completely hands off of everything else and I was just eating red meat. And she's like, well, if it's working for you, just continue with it. Like I see
Keep
no
doing that.
problem.
That's amazing.
So
That's amazing. I don't
yeah.
think enough people that do this lifestyle actually look at their bloods before and after. So I'm so glad that you were able to do that and really get like tangible, because feelings
Yeah.
are difficult to explain, and everyone's feelings are a little bit different in terms of what their IBS looked like or what their issues were before versus what they feel like on carnivore. So that's amazing. For me, it's always been skin. I've suffered from acne and IBS my entire life, and I would eat lots of pastas and breads, and IBS was just this term that my family doctor would throw around and say like, oh, you've got IBS, you're stressed, you're highly strung, it's normal for a teenager to have all of that. And then taking those processed carbohydrates and gluten and seed oils out of my diet, like I don't have IBS. Do you know what I mean? I'm not this girl that has
Yeah.
IBS. It's the food. It's not me.
Yeah.
And the only thing that's cleared my skin over the years, and I'm not, you mentioned going home to your mom and having her cooking. This December, I wasn't exactly the best carnivore. There was quite a lot of cake involved, but I can feel it. Like I'm wearing it in my gut, and I'm wearing it on my skin now. But when you're able to eat like that, and you see things shift for you in such a beautiful way. And I like what you said about, you said going to the toilet is a lot less stressful. And I think only if you've experienced carnivore do you know what that means. Like a part of me wanted you to elaborate, but like if you've been on the diet and off the diet,
Like
you
butter.
understand.
Like butter. Yeah.
So I was raised vegetarian. My mom was vegetarian, so I was raised vegetarian, and so there was a lot of lentils. I guess similar to maybe some of the Pakistani diet, but like so lentils and chickpeas were such a massive part of the foundation of the diet, and with that came a lot of gas. And there was just a saying in my home that like vegetarians, we have gas, it's normal. It is not normal to have gas. And once you've gone on, I mean, I know we're talking about toilet stuff now, but like once you've gone on that journey, you'll understand that, oh, I'm not just this gassy person that needs to go hide in the bathroom every 5 minutes. Actually, it's my diet
Yeah.
that's the problem.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I found out too is because like I was like growing up, I had a lot of gas and it was solely because of the foods that I was eating. I know that now. And now like I called up my mom like after I started carnivore and I'm like I figured it out. Like I know why my stomach was hurting every single day and I had all these issues and it's because of this. So, yeah, I think it's been like completely transformational. I wish more people would be open to it and there's always the keyboard warriors that are like, this is so bad for you. And a lot of those people have never even tried it. So you
Yeah.
like don't diss it until you try it. It's phenomenal.
Okay, so I love that. I'm curious to know a little bit about your hijab journey and the sporting space. So were you in hijab from a young age, or is that something that you moved into as in the sporting space, and how was that?
Yeah, so I actually started wearing hijab when I was 9, and not for the
Wow,
reasons you might
mashallah.
think. So when I was growing up in Winnipeg, we had one mosque that like everyone kind of congregated to, and that mosque was like our life. We spent a lot of time there. We had a lot of fun there. We met our friends there. We had a lot of celebrations there. And so my parents would only allow us to go to things that were like girls only. And when we were growing up, there was like this group of girls that were like the cool girls, right? We have our groupies. And I was second oldest of 5 siblings. So these group of girls were like my older sister's age. And so when I would come around, I was always known as the little sister. I wasn't I wasn't seen as like a human. I was like a subhuman because, oh, you're the little sister that just like tags along. And that used to drive me nuts. And I was like, what do these girls have that I don't have? And I was like, okay, they all wear hijab. So maybe if I start wearing hijab, they'll start to take me seriously. So I told my mom that I wanted to start wearing hijab like my sister. And my mom's like, no, you're too young. Like, you're way too young to be wearing this. Absolutely not. Fought my mom tooth and nail. I cried every day. I begged her. I was like, please, please, please let me wear hijab. Please let me wear hijab. My mom was like, no. Like, she stood her ground. She's like, you are a child. You do not need to wear this right now. Like, absolutely not. This is ridiculous. And I held my ground as well. I was like, no, I'm going to wear it. I don't care what you say. Like, I want to wear it. Please just let me do it. And my dad was like, just to shut me up, he was like, okay, you know what? If she wants to do it, just let her do it. Like,
I mean, there are worse things that you could be asking your parents.
Yeah. Exactly. So I started wearing it, and guess what happened? I still wasn't taken seriously by those girls. So I wore it. I started wearing it for the wrong reason. I was a child. It was like a religious reason. My parents never forced me. It was a complete opposite. And when I wore it, I regretted it immediately. I was like, nothing's changed. I'm still the little sister. And I didn't take it off. I ended up continuing with my hijab. I never took it off after that, mainly because of what my sister told me. She was like, when she's my older sister, so she used to mess with me. I was very gullible. I used to take her words as gospel. So she was like, when you start wearing hijab, there's no going back. Like, you have to wear it forever. And I was like, oh my God, okay, I have to wear it forever. So I took that and I just like ran with it. And I regretted it as I grew older. Yes, it was very, very difficult during the teenage years, your awkward years, going to a new school. It was really tough. It was really, really tough. And I never admitted it. I tried to like always come off as like strong, like I can do this, but it was really, really tough. I don't want to get into like all of that, but yeah, there were days where and it kind of like, because you're in that awkward stage of your life, there was days where I loved wearing it, and there were days where I hated wearing it. There were days where I was really proud of it, and there were days where I just wanted to come home and burn it. And then enter marriage and children and all of that. I still was not 100% with my hijab. There were days where I would leave the house not wearing it because I just didn't love it. And it wasn't until a few years ago, so this is maybe about like 5-6 years ago, where something in me changed, and it was when I started praying tahajjud prayer. When I started praying tahajjud, something in me changed. And I'm going to get really emotional talking about this because there is something about tahajjud prayer that I cannot describe. There's a sweetness to it. And only if you've prayed tahajjud and stuck with it, that you will understand what this sweetness is, and that connection that you have with your creator during that time of night is something very, very special. It's really indescribable. And something in me just completely changed. And I don't think about the burden of wearing. I don't see it as a burden. I see it as like a privilege. And it's funny, I was talking to my husband about this when we were on vacation recently. We went to Mexico, and it's really hot. And I'm walking around in my swimsuit, my Muslim swimsuit, and I didn't complain for that entire time, except for one day where it was like scorching hot, and I was like, okay, I'm feeling the heat now. And I was telling my husband, I'm like, if I was here maybe like 10 years ago, my hijab wouldn't have been on. Like, I would have taken it off because like, oh, no one knows who I am here. I can be whoever I want. I'm on vacation. But I'm like, it doesn't bother me at all that I'm like on this beach and everyone around me is like half naked and I'm fully clothed. Like, it doesn't bother me at all. And I'm completely okay with it. And he was surprised too. He was like, yeah, because like you hated wearing it at that one point in your life. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. It's just something that I do. It's just part of my day. It's like when people drink coffee, it's part of their day. I put my hijab on it. It's just what I do, and I don't think twice about it anymore. So alhamdulillah, like, may Allah protect and preserve that, because it's something that I hold really close to my heart now. With the athletic space, my biggest concern when starting jiu-jitsu was, how do I keep this on my head without it falling
Yeah.
off, without wearing pins? Like, what, that was the biggest dilemma. Is I wasn't concerned about, well, what are people going to say. I wasn't concerned about being the only hijabi in the room. I wasn't concerned about how are people going to like perceive me.
Yeah.
None of that was a concern. It was just like, how the hell do I keep this on my head? That was the biggest concern. And that's when I started creating my own hijab, and I started designing it, and I started experimenting with how I wanted it to look and the fabrics and all of that. And then when I finally figured it out, and it wasn't perfect, it's better now. That's when I was like, oh my gosh, like everybody could do this now. You know, like now there's no excuse. Anyone can do jiu-jitsu.
For me, my story is a little bit different in that I started my jiu-jitsu journey and only started wearing the hijab later. And initially it was a big stress. How do I keep this thing on? And I have some wild stories which I shared with you on Instagram about, like, I'm sewing it into my braids. I've used double-sided tape, like wig tape, just to try to keep it on. But once you figure out your system, and the other thing that I've figured out is that it seems like head shape is a thing, because what works for you might actually not work for me. And also from a jiu-jitsu perspective, your grappling style is a thing. So I'm using my head all the time. I'm very wrestling heavy. And so I found it slipping a lot. But once you figure all of that out, one of the things that has been a big plus for me, besides the hair loss, has just been the amount of time that I see other women fixing their hair between rounds. And that used to be me. So there's like, every time the round ends, these women are like trying to tie their hair up really quickly before the round starts. And then the ponytail comes out while you're grappling, and then you're distracted by that. So once you've got your hijab sorted, then it's like smooth sailing, where you don't have to adjust it, you don't have to fix it. It's in place, which is amazing. But it's a journey to get there.
Yeah, and that's so true. Like everyone has their own style of grappling. Like if you're a guard player, right, or if you use more of your head, that's so true. And I did find that as well. Like I kind of had to not adjust my training. Like before I finally like secured it on my head, I was like, okay, well I can't do that because my hijab is gonna fall off. Getting out of a headlock was really tough for me in the beginning, and this actually happened in a tournament where my hijab came all the way back, and I was mortified, because not because people saw my hair, because it just looked ridiculous that I'm like pulling it back up, and it's distracting. It is so distracting when that happens, that
all you can think about.
That's all you can think about. And so I'm so glad that I'm getting to a point where I finally secured it on my head. It does not move. The only thing now is just like securing my hair, because like you have to braid your hair, like hijab or no hijab, your hair has to be braided underneath. So I always tell girls that come in the gym, I'm like, braid your hair, learn how to braid, get a YouTube like video, and you have to braid your hair, because ponytails are just like not jiu-jitsu friendly.
When I went into hijab, I had already competed quite a bit, both in MMA and jiu-jitsu, and I started wearing hijab, and then I had a competition coming up, and I was like, or I was considering wearing hijab, and I knew I had a competition coming up. So I started Googling hijabi MMA fighters just to see like who had done this successfully, and like what does it look like? What does hijab look like? Because ultimately, if we're honest, I think in terms of the type of hijab that I wear outside of the gym, it's very different to the hijab that I wear inside the gym. In terms of tightness of clothing, that kind of thing, I don't think I'm perfect in the gym. I'm a lot more clothed than most of the girls, but like the halal police will still come knocking at some point and be like, you're not covered properly. But that's beside the story. So I Googled hijabi MMA fighters, and every single video that I found, the girl loses her hijab like 20, 30 seconds into the match. And I was just like, how do I make sure that this is not me? Because when it's happened in practice, like you said, it's the thing that you focus on completely. Like that becomes, and like you said, it's not even the hair. It's the fact that you look stupid. Like it's sitting halfway there, your face is red, your hair's standing up. Like everything just looks ridiculous at that point. Competing, whether it's jiu-jitsu or MMA, it's not particularly flattering aesthetically on a good day. And now you've got this thing that's like half hanging off your face. So it's been a journey. What would your advice be as a coach to Muslim women who are either grappling with the hijab journey in general and are wanting to become stronger in that, or are looking at a hijab as a speed bump or a reason why they can't start training?
Yeah, so let's talk about the hijab. I really love this question. I think you have to first, if you're really struggling with your hijab like I did when I was growing up, and even this is like well into my 30s, it was, and I figured out what that reason was, and it was because I didn't have a great relationship with my creator. I just didn't. And when I finally strengthened that relationship, everything just kind of fell into place. So if you're struggling with your hijab, ask yourself the hard questions that you're avoiding, that you don't want to answer. Do you have a relationship with your God? Do you have a relationship with Allah? What does that look like? Because if you don't have that relationship, then you're always going to find an excuse or a fault. You're always going to find, Shaitan is always going to try to manipulate you into thinking something else, right? It's always going to be about people. It's always going to be about you when it really should be about your akhirah. So when you think of the end in mind, everything, just like your perception, is always going to change. So I would say to girls, and if I could talk to my 16-year-old self or my 39-year-old self, maybe not 9 because I was still a child then, but if I could talk to my 15-year-old self, I would tell her this, that strengthen your relationship with Allah first. Figure out what that looks like, however long it takes. If you take one step towards Allah, He comes running to you. So strengthen that relationship first, and then everything else will start to make sense. If your hijab, you hate it right now, fine, hate it. That's fine. But let's talk about your relationship with Allah. And when we think about it, and I learned this from a lecture I was listening to, hijab was one of the last things to be revealed in the Quran. What does that tell us? It tells us that all of these other things we need to perfect first. Hijab comes after. We focus so much on the hijab with girls that we forget about all these other things. Like, let's perfect our prayer. And this is a reminder to myself too, because I'm not perfect when it comes to prayer. But let's fix these things first, and then you can focus on the outer. First, focus on the inner, and then you can focus on the outer. Once you've established that, now, okay, when you go into work, if you're a doctor and you're going to surgery, or if you're an athlete, it's not going to be a problem for you anymore because you already know why you're doing it, right? So for girls that want to enter an athletic space, I would say find a place that resonates with you. Not every gym is going to be the same, but I feel that the jiu-jitsu community as a whole is very welcoming. People that train jiu-jitsu want to share jiu-jitsu with the world. There's some exceptions, right? There's some people that are like gatekeepers. But for the most part, local gyms, they want to share their knowledge with you, and they will embrace you. And if a place doesn't feel right, listen to that voice in your head. If it doesn't feel right, that's not the place for you. That's fine. Go and find a place that resonates with you, and never compromise your deen for your dunya. Like, never compromise your hijab to please someone. And again, that just comes down to your relationship with Allah, and you just have to strengthen that first. And then everything will just become a lot easier. I think for anyone, whether you wear a hijab or not, walking into a gym with respect to jiu-jitsu is really intimidating. When my husband and I travel and we go to other gyms, we start to feel like we were like, oh, this is what it feels like to walk into a gym. This is what, like, new members that come to us, and this is how they feel. And we finally get to, like, experience that. It is very scary. It is very daunting, especially when you come in and you don't know anything and you're the new guy, you're the new girl. Yeah, it is scary for anyone.
Zainab, thank you so much. This has been such a fun hour. I've really enjoyed my time with you. Just in closing, if anybody's wanting to get hold of you, wanting to find out more about the hijab that you're designing, or maybe pop in to one of your academies, how can they get hold of you?
Yeah, so my Instagram handle is Lady Z Official. So Z is spelled Z-E-E. Lady Z Official on Instagram, so you can send me a DM there. And then, if you want to know about the sports hijab that I'm coming out with, it'll be specifically for jiu-jitsu and martial arts, grappling sports. And I am working so hard to make sure that it stays on our head, and I've been testing it out. That is coming soon, inshallah. Thank you so much for this time, Jess.